Welcome to Q&A Live. I'm Stephen Drunsic. Today we have a very, very special guest on our show today, someone you all have seen on many episodes in the past. This man's an 8th generation Vermonter. He's a public servant. He's a former House Assembly member, a real estate broker, author, musician, and general local celebrity around town. Bob Stannard, welcome to the show. Good to have you. I'm sure you missed it.
On levels I do, sure. Yeah, absolutely. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I just a small disclaimer. I guess we picked the wrong day to film this show, having had a World Series final game. Red Sox won last night. That was a long game.
I went to bed late last night. Yeah,
I did too.
I'm a little sleepy.
And I knew I had to prepare for someone like you coming on the show, but I appreciate you coming on.
Well,
and
I wook up this morning. I took a one-a-day vitamin, so
that's all it takes for you. Just one a day.
Not much more than that, really. Decaf coffee, one a day. I'm off we go.
Yeah, off we go. Well,
so how about the Red Sox, huh? I mean,
how about the Red Sox?
Okay. I mean, winning at home,
Victory
1918, like what is that, 90 years or something?
Yeah, 85, 90 years. Quick math.
On Cabbage Night?
On Cabbage Night, no less. Couldn't put two better scenarios out there for town mischief.
Well, I felt bad for St. Louis, but
hey,
you know, the tide was coming in.
The tide was coming in.
Yeah, it was great. It was actually a good game, even though it was a lopsided score.
Yeah, I know. I think you always want to have a close score, kind of at least going into the final innings, so you're on the edge of your seat.
Well,
I
unless
think
you're Boston.
Yeah, that's right.
The idea of having 6 runs is not a bad thing. And, you know, my wife's from the Boston area. Allison's from Mansfield, Massachusetts, and so we have this whole connection to that area. So, were I to mention the name St. Louis, I'd have probably been drawn and quartered.
Well, we are in the Red Sox nation here, all over England, I guess. It's greater metro
pretty much
Boston.
Goes to the Mississippi River.
Well, Bob, you know, one of the things in reading your biography, I think a lot of people know about you. They've seen you around town. They've seen, you know, the various hats that you wear. You've obviously sat in this seat for a long time, interviewing other people. But you know, you've got a story to tell, which is, you know, I think your life is very interesting. You grew up here in Vermont. You're an 8th generation Vermonter. Now, I don't think too many people can say they're an 8th generation, maybe 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation, but I'm really going to have to hold you to this. You gotta give me some history here.
I should have brought the genealogical book that I did. Actually, it's kind of a funny story. It all started with the very first time I went on the internet, and I went to a thing called Yahoo, and I had a 187 computer, and everything was very slow and very primitive. And I'm on the internet for the first time, and I typed my last name in because I didn't know what to do even. I'm surfing the web.
Right. Kind of like Johnson, probably a lot of responses.
I just stopped in, I typed in Stannard, and there were 26 Standards. Now there's like 26,000, but there were 26 Standards. And I literally scrolled down on one, stopped, and it was Jan Stannard from Maidenhead, England. And I reached out and I said hello. The short story was 5 weeks before I had done all this, she and her family had made reservations to stay at the Wilburton Inn in Manchester.
No kidding.
How weird is that?
How weird is that?
It is very weird.
And so they end up staying at your house.
And now they ended up staying at the Wilburton, and we partied for 3 days and had just a most wonderful time. And they're leaving, and I said, it's too bad you didn't get a chance to meet my daughter, who was away at Johnson at the time. And she just looked at her husband and said, well, we could use some help with the girls. How would she like to come work for us as an au pair?
No kidding.
And by clicking on a mouse, my daughter ended up going over there for 3 months and then went to Glasgow School of Art for 3 months. So she had a really amazing experience. But I didn't feel as though I could send her to England, the home of Stannards, unarmed. So I dashed up to the Dorset Historical Society and said, hey, do you have anything here on Stannards? We've been here for some time. And it was so bizarre. The lady that was running the facility at the time said, well, you might start here. And she gave me the Reverend Parsons Pratt, who was the minister of Dorset Church from 1850 to 1901. And in his last act, indeed, when he retired, he sat down with the heads of household of his parish and said, okay, you're a Stannard and you married a Waite and da-da-da-da. And he wrote out the lineage in quill pen.
Wow.
So where
Okay.
people spend their entire life going to Salt Lake City and doing the Mormon thing and trying to find their background, I went to one book at the Dorset Historical Society, opened it up, and my entire ancestry was laid out in quill pen, who was my grandfather and great-grandfather and great-great, and on it went. Right to the degree where I got us back to Chauncey Stannard in 1790.
1790, which is right around the when these towns were incorporated.
Right around.
Manchester, Dorset,
It
1791.
turns out, and I was very proud of this, you know, I had it all typed up and did a whole thing about it, and I went to cemetery records and war records, and I did a whole bunch of research on this. And I brought it to my aunt, who was one of the last surviving Stannards around, and I told her how proud I was that I got us back to Chauncey Stannard, and she said he wasn't the first.
And was Chauncey Stannard, so did you get into the life of Chauncey Stannard at all? Was there evidence of public service, or was he...
I have no idea. No, it was just the name and the relatives. There was no description as to who they were. The only description I do have is it turns out my aunt said he wasn't the first, so I had to go back and find Lemuel.
Lemuel.
Who turned
not
out...
a common name these days.
Not a common name. I should have named they should have named my grandson Lemuel. Lemuel was Chauncey's father. And
Okay.
Lemuel and Lobias Stannard moved up here from Haddam, Connecticut at or around 1760. And they were Coopers.
Were they called Flatlanders back then?
Frankly, I like to say that I'm one of the original Flatlanders.
Okay.
Yeah. They were barrel makers, and they came up here, and it was interesting. I could find Lemuel, but I couldn't find Lobias. And part of that reason was they lived on what we know as Nims Road off Dorset West Road. When you go from Church Street to Dorset West Road, you turn right, and that first left-hand turn used to be Nims Road, and they may have changed the name, kind of goes up the hill. Mm-hmm. Lemuel lived on the south side, and Lobias lived on the north side. And back at that time in history of Dorset, they thought that that road was the Dorset-Rupert town line. So Lobias shows up over in Rupert. Turns out, as we all know, 315 is about a mile or so north of where they were. But isn't that weird?
I'm fascinated, you know, because you know I was born here, and I guess that makes me a real Vermonter. But in order to be a native Vermonter, you have to have parents who are born here. But my God, you're going back generations. So I don't know what they call you. Probably. What do they call you? What are they calling you on the street these days, Bob?
It's a family show, so we can't really get into what they call me. But yeah, listen, if you're born here, you're a native Vermonter. And frankly, I've never put a whole lot of stock in that. If you moved here and you love this state, you're a Vermonter as far as I'm concerned.
That's right. That's right.
You know, and the whole thing about Flatlanders versus non-Flatlanders. There are people that come here and have an entirely different experience than you had, an entirely different experience than I had. But that doesn't...
Oh, disclaimer, I don't use it as a derogatory term, I just...
Well, I was using it in your regards, in regards to you as a derogatory term. So,
well, I appreciate that.
Sorry.
That'll set the tone.
You were just barely born here.
That'll set the tone for the
You were
rest
just
of this.
barely born here. I mean, I don't even think I
barely born, that's right.
You're from
Don't
Jersey.
forget that.
You're from Jersey. It's as simple as that.
Well, so you've lived here all of your life.
Not yet.
Not yet. You're still around. Much to some people's chagrin.
Much to a lot of people's chagrin. Oh, they're counting the days. Yeah.
So now, did you start in the public sector, or did you had a little bit of private sector experience? It looks like you.
I went to Castleton College. I graduated in '73, and I came back here because I didn't really know what else to do. And '73, you weren't around for that. But it was a dark time.
Tell me what Manchester was like.
It was pretty dark in '73.
You really paint a picture for all of us.
We had the oil crisis. We had the Equinox Hotel was closed. There was no Equinox Hotel.
It was vacant.
There was plywood over the windows. It was a vacant building.
Hard to believe.
Yeah. It closed the year I graduated from high school in 1969. Don't hold that against me. It wasn't my fault. I don't know why it closed, just because I graduated from high school. But when I was going to Burn, we would walk down Seminary Avenue and go to the Equinox Junior across the street, where they had a real marble soda fountain, and it was, we took it all for granted.
Equinox Junior.
And that's where Covey and Nye is now. It's where those shops are. Where Covey and Nye is, there was actually a soda shop there, and it had a real genuine marble counter with the whole soda fountain thing. And I didn't pay attention to it. It was just what It's kind of like foliage. Yeah, okay, the leaves turn red. So what? What else do you want to know?
You didn't really have a tourist. I mean,
It was kind of touristy, but it wasn't. I mean, you know, we barely had skiing. And skiing came in the 50s, so it's been around for 20 years.
Certainly predated the outlets and everything else.
73 was a very different time. It was a very, very tough time. I couldn't find anything to do, so I bought a chainsaw, and I went to work cutting pulpwood for a French-Canadian named Jacques. I don't even know Jacques' last name at this point. He didn't speak very good English, which was fine.
Did you have to go up to Canada to do this, or
No, we were logging on the backside of Equinox.
Okay.
And we were getting paid $8 a cord. There was 3 of us. A guy named Bill Herbig and Helm Calfee and myself. And
Calfee, okay, I recognize that name.
Yeah, well, Alan and Bill, and they're all from around here. So we're up there cutting pulpwood for $8 a cord. We were going to make $1 million. And it turns out between the 3 of us, we could do about a cord and a half a day. It was really just a hideously bad experience, but I did learn how to fall trees and cut wood.
Well, that's
and it was a really hard job. Dead middle of winter. You had to bring your lunch and your gas and your oil and your sharpener, and we'd hike back about a mile and then start cutting, clearing roads. It was really.
Was this before they had the toll road going up too?
No, that's been there for a long time. The monastery had just been built.
Okay.
And so, but that's where we were. We could see the monastery from where we were cutting. It was, the view was fantastic. The work was hideous. And we didn't make any money. I don't even know if I paid for my chainsaw, but we had a good time.
Well, that's good.
Kind of.
So you went to Castleton.
Let me think about that. When I came back here, I initially went to work for Dick Hayes.
Okay.
Because there was nothing to do here. And Dick hired me for like 3 or 4 months, and they had the flood of '73, for those who may remember that, and there was a lot of damage done in logs in the river and whatnot.
How did that compare to our recent flood
Not
with Irene? Not even close.
Not even close.
Okay.
It was a
so new benchmarks have been set in 2010.
1/20th of Irene. It was a good hurricane. We had water over the road and whatnot, but nothing like Irene. But Ken Johnson and Phil Papps and myself were pulling logs out of the Otter Creek over in East Dorset. It was an interesting job. And then after that little ordeal was over, Ken Johnson and I were working side by side, drilling and blasting for a new road that we were putting into a place that you know as Bromley Village.
Yes.
And the homes up behind
you had to blast to put a road in up there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, some great moments of blasting on that.
Great moments of blasting.
Great moments of blasting.
What kind of certificate did you require to start handling explosives back in the mid-70s? Here,
orders from Dick Hayes. Orders from Dick Hayes saying, "Here, there's a box of dynamite." It was always a good idea not to carry the dynamite and the blasting caps at the same time.
I'd imagine.
One of my jobs was to stop traffic on Route 11 and 30 when we pushed on the T-box and blew away half the side of the mountain. And as an aside, there was a great moment where I was the least likely guy to be directing traffic. I was wearing dungarees, no shirt, work boots. My hair was down to here and I had a red beard.
I'm trying to picture
I had
all
a
this.
knife on my belt that I was using to cut wire, and I'm standing out there stopping traffic. And at one point, a guy in a Porsche comes by and he starts to go by me, and I said, "Hold it, you got to stop." And I think he gave me the finger. I guess we can say that on the show, or said something nasty to me, and I said, "Fine." And he got just to the crest of the hill when they hit the bar, and we showered him with rocks. It was fabulous. I have no idea what his car was worth, but it was worth a lot less after he did that. And he came back and started throwing a heart attack at me, and I said, "Here, run down to the auto parts and get yourself some paint." I wasn't very sympathetic, as I recall. Early days. Then I had to do something slightly more productive, and ended up going to work at the Orvis Company.
Okay.
Shipping and receiving. And I was hired for 4 months during the Christmas season, and ended up staying there about a year and a half.
Again, certainly not the company it is today. I mean,
totally
much smaller scale.
Oh my God. Lee Perkins, Sr., owned the company, and I got to be very good friends with him.
Were you a fly fisherman?
I learned to be.
Okay.
I was trained how to fly fish by Tony Skilton, Dick Davis, Landy Bartlett.
Landy Bartlett.
Yeah, these guys were all working there, and I took the 3-day course because the employees could take it for free, and I'm there with all these doctors and lawyers and all these people that are paying money, and I mean, I have some of the best fly fishermen instructors in the world coming over to me saying, no, no, this is what you do. And it was great fun, and I learned a lot from those guys. It was an interesting time.
Yeah, and what, this is still in the 70s here?
Yeah, yeah. This is about 74, 75, 74.
This is when I come onto the scene now.
Oh, well.
This is where Bill Drunsic comes onto the scene, probably.
Probably he was he probably was coming into town about that.
Yeah.
Howard Gadet. Howard and Marion Gadet had Gadet's Children's Store on Main Street, Manchester, and I think it's where Whitney Wilmington is now. It's in that area. And Howard had about 14 lawns that he mowed with an old lock lawnmower and an old 1950s Ford truck, and he had a heart attack. And a friend of mine, Helm Calfee, with whom I had been previously logging on the backside of Equinox, had since bought out Shorty Hazelton out in Dorset and was mowing lawns, and said, hey, you ought to try doing this. And I said, whatever.
I can blast, I can cut down trees.
If I can blow them out into pieces,
fish.
I can probably mow lawns. So I went to Howard after he got home from the hospital and negotiated a deal with him to buy his business, because he had had a heart attack and he was done. But I couldn't make a living at 14 lawns, so I sat down with a man named Jeff Hills, who used to have Hills Court mail order company, and we designed a little postcard, and I sent out 3,000 postcards, and I'll never forget, it was a great day. I went to the post office and mailed 3,000 postcards out to people in Manchester and Dorset trying to get more business, and I was absolutely terrified. I said, what happens if half of these people respond?
Right.
I mean, there's no way I can mow that many lawns. As it was, I'll
get you next summer.
I'll get you next lifetime. I went from 14 lawns to 70 lawns overnight, and I hadn't even started mowing yet. It wasn't even the season. It was still snow on the ground. So I'm lining up all this business. The snow melts. I hire a crew. We rake all the gravel off your lawn, and I start walking behind an ancient lock lawnmower. And at the end of the first day, I said, "Oh my God, I'm going to die." And I said to Helm, I said, how far are we walking? And,
how many more of these do we have to do?
I was thinking maybe I was walking 3 to 5 miles a day, something like that. And I went back to Orvis and bought a pedometer, and I wore a pedometer for a week. The first day I walked 26 miles.
That's a full marathon.
Well,
so
I mean,
you were training.
You're mowing, you're loading, you're going, you're da-da-da-da. 26 miles. The next day I walked 24 miles. The next day I walked 25 miles.
That's why you're getting that hip replaced.
Thursday was a short day, and I think we only walked 18 miles. And I said, this is insane. You can't walk
100.
You can't walk 100 miles a week. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, might as well do the long trail.
Yeah, I did that for a few years, and then I switched over to Toro T-mowers and rode. And I said, man, that's a whole lot easier. Frankly, I was playing volleyball at Gurry's, which is now Bistro Henry's, and on Tuesday nights. And I know you people find this hard to believe, but there was a time when I drank a little bit and played volleyball and did really crazy things.
Sometimes together, all the time together.
Pretty much. And I was mildly concerned about, like, turning an ankle or breaking a leg, because I'm out of business. I mean, I would be done. And I was thinking the likelihood of something like that happening was somewhere in the high 90%. So I was able to switch over to a riding lawnmower. But my Lord, boy, I was in fabulous. I look like you.
So, well,
I was in fabulous shape. But it was a crazy way to make a living. I did that for 8 years. And
okay. So this is where the entrepreneurial spirit began. I mean, I guess it was kind of.
Well,
you kind of had to figure something out back at that time.
If you're going to survive in Vermont, you better be in pretty good shape, and you better have some sort of a brain that you can figure out how to live here, because it's not easy. You know, you got to see what's coming down the pike and have the courage to jump on it and go do it.
So obviously, at some point, you started to take an interest in town politics, and was this right around the time or am I skipping a few beats here?
No, they're pretty much on track. A guy named Hal Rainey was on the Manchester Planning Commission and the Bennington County Regional Planning Commission. And he was working with CVPS, and he got promoted, and he moved up north. And so there were 2 seats available. And to this day, I don't remember who it was that came to me and said, hey, you ought to apply for that. And I was sort of thinking I'd apply for it and not get it. But I applied for it and I got it. So I'm on the Regional Planning Commission and the BCRC in '81. that's getting me involved in the town a little bit. I kind of like the idea of giving back to the community.
Sure.
I always thought that was part of the gig of living in a small town, is you give back, even if you don't have time and you can't afford it, do it anyway. And I'd been on both of those commissions just a few months and got a call from a guy we all know in town, Seth Bongartz, and
Sure.
said, I'm running for re-election and I want to know if you'd be interested in running for state rep. Red Hinckley had held a seat, and he used to run the butcher shop here in Manchester.
It's on the top of the hill there, right?
Where the shipping center is,
Okay.
right on Main Street. Anyways, he was getting done, and I said, boy, that was about as far off in left field as I could imagine. I thought you had to be a lawyer to do that stuff. And Seth said, God, no, and, preferably not. Again, put my name in the ballot. I couldn't imagine I'd actually win this. And
This is for assembly.
this is for this, state rep. Yeah.
Okay.
And this was in '82, and I won. And as I'm
How many beers did you have to buy at Gurry's?
Oh my Lord! I wasn't like the individual, more as volume. As I'm campaigning, I'm.
Do you remember who you campaigned against? Or did you have any?
Tim Stevenson.
Okay.
Yeah, and much to the amazement of many people, I was running as a Republican with Seth. He was a Republican, which I thought was amusing, because I didn't really see myself as a Republican at the time. But he said, "Well, it's it's a Republican district," and I said, "Whatever." My lineage would be thrilled to death, because I come from a family of Republicans. So.
New England Republicans. Yeah. That's,
Anyway, as I'm campaigning, the district back then was Manchester, Dorset, Danby, Mount Tabor, Peru, Landgrove, and Winhall, 7 towns. It was 63 miles from one end to the other of the district.
all on dirt.
It took you forever to get from Landgrove to Danby.
So you went out and did a constituent meeting campaign?
Oh, I'm going door to door.
Doors.
I mean, that's what you had to do
to
win the seat. And I went door to door to all 7 towns and worked myself to death.
Did you have a platform, a specific? I mean, what was a big
I
issue in
promised to show up.
1981?
I promised to go. If I get elected, I'll go to Montpelier. I think that was the only promise I made. I had no idea
That was
what
still
I was
a
doing.
4-month term, 5-month term?
No, it was 2 years.
I mean,
2
every
years.
year,
But
tenure.
see, it worked out perfectly, because I was going to be there from January until April. That's what I thought. Maybe May, just in time to come home and start mowing lawns again. You see, it was like being a farmer. Same idea.
Right.
Perfect. Great schedule. I'm campaigning in Danby, and I ran into Art White or Lee White, of Art White's Country Gardens, which is that little antique center in Danby, which is now defunct. And I walked in with my little card, and I said, "Hi, I'm Bob Stannard, running for state rep." He goes, "I know, I've been waiting for you to show up." I said, "Well, wow, here I am." And he said, "I want to buy your business." I said, "Well, my business isn't for sale." And he said, "Well, that's ridiculous. Everything's for sale." And I got into this business for about $1,500. And I said, he said, "What do you want for it?" And I just said, $35,000. He goes, "All right, drop the paperwork."
You're thinking, geez, I should have
Just like that.
Shot a little bit higher, just like that.
I should have said 50. I came home, and Allison said, "Well, how'd campaigning go?" And I said, "Great. I went to 22 houses and I sold our business."
Now what are you going to do?
And she said, "What do you mean you sold our business? What are we going to do?" I said, "It's not what we're going to do. It's what we're not going to do. We're not going to mow lawns anymore." And so it's not the first time I've created a lot of angst for my spouse, I might add. The poor thing. I can't believe we've been together. We've been married 40 years this year.
Oh, congratulations.
She gets a trophy or something. She should get an award or something. She should be sitting here. Not that she would, I guess. But anyway, so I sold the business, and I sold it, and I hired out to work for him for a year, and then after that, during that time, I went and got my real estate license, and I ended up selling real estate.
That's right, because we had a little bit of a real estate boom in the early 80s.
In the 80s,
and then we had a crash.
I was working with Jack
We had
Towsley.
one in the 70s, too, and then we had one in the 80s.
The crash was tough. I worked with Jack Towsley and Dick Bovey at the log home place going up the mountain. It was a real estate company we had there.
Remember Dick Bovey he had a log home of his own, didn't he, actually?
Did he have a log home? I don't think so.
Up by Airport
He started
Road
off
there?
on Richville Road.
Okay.
He was a pilot.
He taught me how to fly, actually.
Yeah, he was a great pilot.
Oh, absolutely.
He was a great guy, and that was a wonderful time. It was we had just a wonderful time in that particular era, and then things kind of drifted off. I'm trying, oh boy, the chronology of my life. What happened after that? Holy smokes!
Now we're getting buckle up.
The short story was I was in the House for 6 years. I changed parties. I got beat. Came back here and I went to work for Bill Calfee in the Waterworks company, and then I was there for about a year.
You kind of glossed over that tenure, though, when you were in the House. I mean, was there anything in particular that was memorable? Did you advance any legislation that would that'd still be having some effect in Vermont today? I mean, were you...
I ended up, my first term I was on judiciary. My following 2 terms I was on appropriations, and which was a real jump. And to actually sit on the money committee, you know, we doled out money, and you really got just an unbelievable education as to how state government works in the state of Vermont. And it's a very...
Did that color your perspective coming out after that experience? In terms of
it didn't color it at all. But it opened my eyes as to how dedicated the people are that work here, and how transparent it is here in Vermont, and just how close it is.
How accessible it is.
How accessible and how close it is. And maybe it's because I was on appropriations. And if you remember the Appropriations Committee, if you want information, you get it in warp speed. I never felt ever from any bureaucrat that I dealt with in the 80s that there was holding back, that there were games played, that was, I mean, it was just, here's what we're doing, straight up. You don't like it, you change it. But this is what we're doing, this is what the law says we do, this is what we're doing. And it was a really an interesting experience.
And when you went up there, or at least as I recall now from Jeff Wilson serving, you know, he works in our company. So it's a 4 to 5 month period, January to April, sometimes May, and you camp up there for a week, I guess, and then you come back on weekends, and you don't have any staffers. I mean, pretty much, you don't have an office.
No office, no staff.
It's really the true General Assembly, really.
Yeah, it's a General Assembly. There is a staff of lawyers that will draft your idea. They'll take your unbelievably brilliant idea and turn it into legalese, if you will, language that would end up in the books. Or if your idea is less than remarkable, they may try to talk you out of it without actually saying, "Are you kidding me? You are dumber than a stone. You really want to do that?"
You're in the wrong business.
Right.
Now Howard Dean also.
Howard Dean and I came in together.
Okay.
We were in the same class, if you will.
Okay. So you had some interaction with
him. And
him.
he was minority leader when I was on appropriations, and we've been friends ever since. I mean, I've known Howard since the day we went in.
Okay.
Didn't he run for president?
Yeah, he did.
Yep. Too bad. You know, if he played harmonica, he'd been a great musician.
Yeah, if he screamed through the harmonica.
No, he's a good guy. He's done very well for his little launch.
I see him on.
You know, we kind of joked about it. You know, he was minority leader in the House, and he made this announcement he was going to run against Peter Smith for lieutenant governor. I was pretty plugged in to the politics at the time. I'm on appropriations. You know, I'm where I was, and I said, "Really? Peter Smith was very popular lieutenant governor." I said, "Well, that's the end of Howard. He's going to get creamed." And 3 weeks after Howard announced he was running, Peter Smith announced he was running for Congress. So the seat opened up. It was an open seat. And we just sat back and said, "You've got to be kidding me. He's going to win this." And he did. He had, I think Susan Aul ran against him. And so it was 2 unknowns, but Madeline Kuhn was governor, and he came in on Madeline's coattails. And ran again and won. And then Dick Snelling came back as governor after I left, and had been governor 9 months, and then had a heart attack and died, and Howard got a call and said, "Hey, you're governor." Boom. And Howard ended up being governor for, what, 10, 11 years? Yeah. Remarkable. Pretty amazing. You know, it's indicative of how serendipitous life is anywhere, but certainly here in Vermont and in politics. You know, he probably had aspirations to run for governor, but he didn't know he was going to get a call from the state policeman saying, "Now what do we do? You're governor. Make a decision." Boom. That's a life changer, huh?
That certainly is.
Wow.
It worked out well for him, to some extent.
So in the meantime, I'm doing state rep, coming home, selling real estate. And then when I got out, I went to work for Bill Calfee for a little bit. And then a guy named Biff Midhofer came to me and said, "I need your help." And I said, "What do you need?" And he said, "I'd like you to help me run East Mountain Transport which was a waste hauling recycling company in Sunderland. And I just cracked up at that. I said, wow, going from politics to garbage, how perfect. I considered it a promotion. I worked for Biff for about 5 years, 6 years. I helped him sell that company. My entire life has been, you remember the cartoon character Mr. Magoo? The guy with the big thick bottle glasses, and he was like legally blind, and you know, he would just like walk from one steel girder to the next and never fall 100 stories. And just have no idea what he's doing. That's kind of what my life's been like. Opportunities have come to me, and
haphazard lucky.
Many of them I've turned down, but some of them I've said, you know, I might try that. And Biff came to me and asked if I would work as a salesman selling garbage. And I said, wow, imagine how the hell do you sell garbage?
Why not? And
I said, why not? It was terribly interesting. And we got
selling garbage or selling the disposal.
Well, yeah, he said, I want you to help
sell
me sell
garbage.
He said, I want you to help me sell garbage. I said, wow,
I've sold
a lot of stuff. I've never thought of the idea of selling garbage.
So I do every day.
I did it for about, I worked with him for close to 6 years. And just as we were winding this down and selling his company, Jeff Wilson, he was a town manager then. He's now our state rep, and he's a really good state rep. I don't think people here in this community have any idea how good he is, but I think he's a better state rep than he was a town manager, and I think he was a great town manager. So I'll leave it at that. But I saw him at town meeting, and I'm trying to remember what year this was. I got done in 90, so it's like 95. And he said, would you be willing to come to a meeting tomorrow morning? This would have been Sunday morning at like 8 o'clock. And I said, what are we talking about? And it's H517, which was a statewide property tax.
Oh, yeah.
For the purpose of funding education.
Education, Act 16.
I'd been reading about it in the paper. It was something that was tried when I was there.
Beginning of the Gold Town era.
It was the genesis of Gold Towns. So I go to a meeting. Walt Freed is there. He was a state rep, and he's talking about H517 and the impact it's going to have, and I'm sitting in the back of the room and don't even know why I'm there. There were individual selectmen from individual towns, so there was no open meeting law violation. It was basically just an education to say, hey, this is coming down, folks. And everybody looked.
And it was coming down from up north, correct?
Yeah, it was going through, and they had the votes, and it was going to happen. And so, what's going to happen here? And I remember the room looking to Jeff as town manager and saying, well, you know, you got to do something about this. And he's like, I'm dealing with policemen and sidewalks. You know, this is above my pay grade. Meeting breaks up, and Jeff came to me and I said, maybe there's something we can do. I sent out a letter to all 250 towns inviting them to a meeting in Manchester I can't remember what the date was. If this was March, this would probably been end of April, maybe May, something like that, to coalesce the towns to just have a discussion about this. And I'll never forget, of course, you know, I kind of just happenstancely sent this letter out to 251 towns, and I didn't put an RSVP on it. So, so I remember Jeff coming to me. It's like it's Wednesday.
You have an idea of how many people
the meeting's
at
Saturday.
Do we need the gymnasium?
Do we need a gym, or do we need a Volkswagen for this meeting?
Yeah. Do we need your kitchen?
And Jeff, I remember Jeff coming up to me that week and saying, "How many people are coming?" And I said, "Oh, I said, well, you're coming, right?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, there's two. Okay. I'm going to be there. You're going to be there." Turns out we had a huge crowd of people. A lot of angst, a lot of anxiety, a lot of concerns.
Yeah, but you really had two people sitting on, I mean, two sides of the spectrum here, right? Because you had those that were going to benefit ultimately, receiving towns.
Oh, yeah.
And then you had gold towns, you know, Manchester
and
being one of them. So there was really probably some distinct animosity that was building up.
Oh, huge.
And you got them all in the same room and said, let's hash it out before we get to voting on a bill?
For the most part, the people representing the various towns that attended this meeting that I called for were those that were going to be impacted. I didn't get a lot of attendance from people that were going to be recipients. They didn't show up. Lieutenant Governor Barbara Snelling showed up. I had press from all over the place show up. And we had a good crowd. We did have it at I decided we were going to have it in the gym at MES or MEMS, and I pulled back on that, and I said we had it in a multi-purpose room upstairs, and I remember Jeff saying it's going to be too small, and I said perfect. If it's in a gym that holds 700 people and you got 100 people, it looks like a small rally. If it's in a room where you get the same 100 people, but the room holds 75 people and they have to stand out in the hall, it's a big rally. Remember that. Play to a small room. I learned that from music.
So did I, actually.
And as it turns out, it was standing room only. A lot of speeches, a lot of talk, and so I followed up and saying, well, folks, here's the deal. I'm happy to quit what I'm doing and go up there and represent you, but you got to pay me. And
that's the beginning of.
So began a career in lobbying.
Yeah.
It was totally serendipitous. I didn't intend to be a lobbyist. I didn't really want to be a lobbyist, and I ended up being a lobbyist, and that would have been 1995. And
that worked out for you for a while.
It worked out for. I lobbied for from '95 to 2005, when I retired the first time. And went to work for the Better Bennington Corporation and running the Nonprofit Development Corporation in downtown Bennington, which, by the way, as a result of doing that, caused me to challenge Keene, New Hampshire to a pumpkin carving contest. We're filming this, for those of you who are watching, on Halloween, and I came dangerously close to showing up today in an orange suit. But then I figured
we can do some.
We can dub it in.
We can dub it in.
Just dub it in. Haas, you can do that, right? That'll be a little project for him. He can just. I'll get the suit. You just dub it in. Anyway, so it
is hunting season too, isn't it?
It's hunting season, and as you pointed out before we went on the air,
you just go right from being a pumpkin and going out in the woods and
go right from here to go out and killing things would be perfect. Although I think if people saw me in the woods wearing that suit, I'd be.
So that's what you're pushing these days, are pumpkin carving contests.
Well, I was back then. And I got a lot of support from my old friend, the late Jay Hathaway.
Oh, yeah.
When I took that job in Bennington, Jay took the job as the director of the Manchester Chamber of Commerce. And the very first thing that we both did was had lunch. And we said, Jay, Bob, this is such an opportunity for two guys that have been friends for 30 years, both finding themselves now in a interesting, somewhat leadership capacity of the North and South Shire of Bennington County. What can we possibly do to bring this county together? Because Manchester has thought of Bennington as being a third world nation, and Bennington has always thought of Manchester as being some elite place from Mars. And I tried to unite the county through pumpkins, and it was such a hoot. We had just such fun. And I think it made a difference during the time. Yeah. I did that for 2 years. I was hired on December 1st in 2005, and I left on December 1st of 2007. I call that 2 years my fat, dumb, and happy period. I put on 25 pounds.
Things were good.
Things were great. I had a paycheck.
You didn't have to push a lawnmower.
I hadn't had a paycheck for a long time. Like a job, like 9 to 5 job. Although I found that I worked probably 80 hours a week, but I thought of it as a 9 to 5 job, with like vacations and all kinds of cool things. When a friend of mine, Amy Schollenberger, with whom I had worked on genetically modified food issues and right to farm issues, called me up and said there's an issue I should really be involved with, which is the issue of the nuclear power plant in Vernon, Vermont.
Okay, I thought you were going to say it.
And would I be willing to meet with a citizens group to talk about closing it down? And I so didn't want to do this. I had a life, I had a job, I was having fun.
And that was going to be a fire pit.
I was going to work for the BBC for the rest of my life till the day I died. It was going to be terrific. And I said, why are you doing this? Was somebody else working on solving world hunger? I mean, you can't shut down a nuclear power plant. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. But Amy's a friend, and I agreed to meet with 3 members of Citizens Awareness Network at the North Shire Bookstore. And the whole time I'm like, let me see, is lunch just about up?
Yeah.
It was really a perfunctory, I'd agree to do it.
But I have to ask you this question, because in my mind, one of the biggest challenges of being a lobbyist and representing a constituency is being fully on board with the concept that you're trying, or the agenda that you're trying to push, whether or not it conflicts with your own. For instance, nuclear power, I happen to be a proponent for certain reasons, but I can understand the arguments for and against. And was there a conflict there for you, or have you ever been put in a position of pushing an agenda or pushing, pushing an agenda that you weren't always personally aligned with? I imagine
I've often said that I could sell gasoline to a man on fire if I believed it was good gas.
Okay.
When I went to work for the Gold Towns, I absolutely fundamentally to my core thought that increasing our dependency upon the property tax was the worst thing we could be doing. And I absolutely believe that that was, fighting that was the right thing to do. I didn't have that same burning desire on nuclear power. I didn't particularly care about nuclear power.
Right.
Okay, we have a little waste issue. What's the big deal? I agreed to have lunch. I thanked them very much. I remember Chris Williams saying he's not going to do this. Not to me, but to the other two members. He said he's not going to do this. He's not going to leave this job and take this on. 7 days after I had lunch, August 27th, I believe the date was, or 28th, a photograph came across my computer screen, and it was the iconic picture of the collapsing of the cooling tower at the Vernon plant. And I remember thinking to myself, if this company will allow the plant to fall into a state of disrepair to the degree where it collapses, under a time when they're trying to get relicensed, they're under a microscope,
right.
They're trying to be the best they can possibly be. They let the plant fall down, and at this particular time, it caused me to have great fear and angst as to who was running this plant and how they were doing it. And I saw that picture and I said, wow, I can't pass this one up. I went down to Allison, who was in the kitchen. I said, honey, I'm quitting my job. She, I think for the 357th time in our relationship, broke down and cried again and said, oh my God, you're really not. And I said, I'm going to go back to Montpelier. And I announced to my friends at BBC that I was leaving. And that was really hard because I had wonderful friends. I had a tremendously good board. I enjoyed every day I went to work, and I said, I'm walking away from this and I'm going back to Montpelier.
Well,
and I did, and I went back, and on my 40th anniversary, which was August 26th of this year, my wife and I had gone back to Cuttyhunk Island on the Elizabeth Islands on Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. We had honeymooned there 40 years ago and never been back. And we were there for an overnight, and on the morning of the 27th, I got a text from Amy Schollenberger, who I had turned all my clients over to after I retired in May of this year.
Decommissioning.
And she said, Amy's short on words, unlike me, and I got a text that said, VY is closing. And I've replied to her. I'm laying in bed. Allison's asleep, and I've got my phone, and I'm
you're writing your own
away.
headlines.
I sent back a message. I sent back a reply to her saying, "Don't mess with me. I'm celebrating my 40th anniversary."
Right.
And she replied with 6 or 7 links to headlines all across the state. And I said, "Wow, imagine that." I knew they were going to close. I knew that the power markets were lower than their ability to compete. And it was their own undoing because they couldn't come to terms with a contract with Vermont Utilities.
There's some changing dynamics.
Had they not been so arrogant in their dealing with Vermont, they'd still be in business. But they said, we don't need you, we'll go to the open market. When they made that decision, I figured they'd be dead because fracking is undermining the market.
Well, we could spend a whole show talking about that.
5 shows.
But I want to get to another important part of your career,
They're all
and that's
important.
what's here.
Yes.
And I think what's really, really incredible is you're a talented harmonica player.
Yes. The only thing I put in my
jazz musician. You played with B.B. King at the Montreux Jazz Festival in Lake
correct.
Geneva, which I think must have been the highlight of your career.
It was the best gig ever.
Tell me about that. Or tell me what's it like to play with B.B. King, and how did B.B. King get to find you?
The short story, I was with a man named Chris Kleeman. Let me hold this up. What a plug. This is so shameless.
What a plug. Are we allowed to do that?
Of course you are. I did it when I hosted this show, did it all the time. I made an album. This is my first album, Made in Vermont, with a guy named Chris Kleeman. I walked on stage at a party at the home of Barbara Riley and Jerry Levin.
Sure.
I used to mow their lawn.
That's where it all starts.
When they first moved to town, I mowed their lawn. And
so that guy's going to be a famous harmonica player.
I hadn't seen them in 25 years, and I saw Barbara Riley 3 times in 1 week. And I mean, how bizarre is this is again serendipity. I had not seen Barbara Riley in 25 years, and I saw her 3 times in 1 week. And the third time I saw her, she said, "Why don't you and Allison come over to the house for a cocktail party?" I said, "Great." Their idea of a cocktail party was 150 people. It was this big thing they were doing for Riley Rink people, and they had a band from Nashville, and oh my God, it was right around the corner, so I was drinking a bunch of margaritas. I didn't care. I was very close to home. And at some point, I ended up on stage playing with this awesome band from Nashville, and we did a little 1-4-5 in the key of A, and I ripped. And standing right in front of me was Barbara Riley and Jerry Levin, and I got all done, and they said, wow, we had no idea you did that. And I said, well, there's a lot you don't know. That's some of it.
Yep.
I got a call the next day from Bill Dyack saying Barbara would like to know if you'd be willing to play for the VIP sponsors of the B.B. King show coming up on Labor Day, do a little thing up at the Equinox Pond. And they asked if I had a band. I said, of course I do. I didn't have a band. And so I called Kleeman. I said, hey, dude, can we pull some players together?
Of course I have a band.
We had a bass player and a drummer that met at that show. They'd never played together. We played a little bit, and I was asked by Bill Dyack if I would allow a guest to sit in and play harmonica. And I said, sure, whatever. And this little short guy with white hair came up and played. He wasn't that good, but he was enthusiastic. And played a couple songs and said, as he was getting done, do you like this band? And everybody clapped. He said, so do I. You'll get to hear them next summer in Montreux. Now, I don't hear very well. My hearing's gone. And I thought he said Montreal. So I went up to Dyack and I said, well, how do you like that? I'm going to Montreal. And he said, why? And I said, the little white-haired dude just invited me. And he said, no, Bob. He said, you're going to Switzerland. That's Claude Nobbs. He's the founder of the Montreux Jazz Festival.
Wow.
And I said, whoa. That no sooner happened, and this little short guy.
But there's a Montreal Jazz Festival, which is
there is, and that's what
I
thought he was talking about, the Montreal Jazz Festival. I didn't know he was talking about Switzerland. No sooner did this happen, and this little short guy with the coolest baseball jacket I've ever seen in my life. It's denim and red leather. Across the back it says B.B. King World Tour 2000. The year is 2002. Okay. And he hands me his card. He says, my name's Floyd Lieberman. I'm B.B. King's manager, and I'd like to know if you'd...
this is all happening the same day.
This is all happening in the same moment.
It's just...
would you be willing to come to New York City and play at B.B. King's Club? And I'm looking at Kleeman, and I said, not in July, because I'm going to Switzerland, but maybe some other time. And he says, here's my card. Get in touch.
And you're thinking, maybe this is going to happen, maybe not.
I'm thinking, this is so had a couple of drinks not happening. There's no chance in the world this is going to happen. Right. And then 4 minutes later, Claude comes back up and says, can I ask you to do me a favor? I said, okay. He just invited me to Switzerland, and he probably wants my firstborn. What is it? What do you want? And he said, well, tomorrow night, B.B. King is playing at the Riley Rink, and would, not the whole band, but would you and Mr. Kleeman be willing to join him after his set for a jam session? And I'm looking at Claude, and I said, I don't know.
Did you spike my drink?
I said, I got third row seats, and I hate to give those up, you know. So the next day, B.B. King does his show, and Kleeman and I walk out on stage and play with B.B. King for the
first. Now, had he seen you or heard you the night before, or was he around? Yeah.
Had no idea.
Okay. He didn't know who you were.
No. He had no idea who I was, and you know, I mean, if Claude goes to B.B. and said, do you mind if these guys sit in? B.B. doesn't care. I mean, B.B.'s got nothing to lose. And sure enough, we walk out there, and we played, I don't know, it seemed like about a nanosecond, probably half an hour. And that was Labor Day of 2002, then 2003, that summer.
Was there a point though where you're just you're up there on stage, you've got B.B. King, and you're kind of thinking, how did I get here? Or is this really happening?
Well, that's been the entire story of my life. How did I get here? You know, how on earth have I found myself in this place?
But you sounded.
I'm sitting next to B.B. King. I take my first solo in front of the entire town of Manchester. There's probably 3,000-4,000 people there. I play a solo, and it was the first time in my life I actually experienced the vibrations of applause. I mean, it's not just the sound, but you actually feel the air move when that many people clap. And I remember looking over to B.B.
I have arrived.
Well, it's just your body moves. It's just like you're trembling from the sound of people screaming and clapping.
At you.
At me. And
not just to get off stage.
I looked over
get out of his way.
Yeah, not just to get out of the building. Right, just for what I did. I remember leaning over to B.B. and said, after people were clapping for me and somebody else was playing, and I leaned over. He's sitting right next to me, and I said, I bet that's why you do this. You know, I was pointing to the audience,
Yeah.
you know, and the applause. And I remember he looked over and he goes, yeah, never get tired of that. Never get tired of that. He said,
What was he like as an individual?
he is, he's exactly what you think he is.
Yeah.
He's,
I don't know where to start
the way
thinking
people,
about that.
the way people see him on stage is the way he is off stage.
Okay.
He is the most gracious, giving, smart, generous conversationalist you'll ever hope to meet.
And so you said, I'll see you in Switzerland.
And I said I'll see you in New York.
Oh, that's right.
Because there was discussions about going to New York, and he said, yeah, I hope that happens. And I never thought it would happen, and I did what I do best, which is follow up, push, pursue. And sure enough, we ended up in the end of June. We went to New York City. We played Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 4 shows. We opened for him at his club, and then he came on, and then we went over to Lucille's, which is the side club, and we played there until 3 o'clock in the morning. On a Thursday night,
classic New York experience.
You know, I mean, I've never played another club in New York. I said, if you play B.B. King's club, where else do you go? The Blue Note. That's about it. You know, and but to walk out of his club in Times Square at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's like 10,000 people in the street, it's like, wow, who's going to bed? This is great.
That is amazing.
It was an amazing experience. I'm home for 10 days. I'm on a plane July 4th weekend. We arrive in Switzerland, and
beautiful Lake Geneva, summertime, can't beat it.
It was such a gorgeous time of year, and our deal was we're supposed to play the Montreux Jazz Club from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. That's my time slot. It's a side club for 2 hours. We're paid $3 grand. It's not a bad gig. You know, we're not supposed to do anything else other than that. Turns out Jerry Garcia's band, the Rat Dogs, were playing, and Claude hated them. And it turns out I was hanging around the hallway where we were scheduled to play, and the producer came up and said, "Mr. Knobs, like you start playing right now," and you could hear the Rat Dogs playing. And I said, "Well, we can't play. They're going to hear us play." And he says he doesn't care. He says he thinks they did too much acid in the 70s. They're boring. Nobody likes them. He said, "Why don't you start playing right now?" And I said, "Oh my!"
Like, you don't know what I did in the 70s.
I said, "Hey, whatever." So Kleeman and I started playing at midnight. So instead of playing a 2-hour gig, we played a 4-hour and 15-minute nonstop gig. At one point, the side guys, piano player and saxophone player from the Rat Dogs, came up to the stage and said, "We heard you guys playing. You guys sound great. Can we sit in?" So we had those guys jam with us for about 45 minutes. And we had Kotaro, this Japanese unbelievable guitarist. He's a savant. He doesn't speak any English, but you don't have to speak a language to know how to play blues.
Sure.
And he's a great blues player. So he joined us for an hour or so, and we never took a break. We were so into what we were doing, and all of a sudden we realized, wow, 4.5 hours gone by. Walking home to our villa at 4:30 in the morning, watching the sun come up.
This must be the pinnacle of your musical career.
Well, the pinnacle was the next day.
The
pinnacle was actually the next day. I got a call at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm laying around my villa with Alf, and the phone rings. I don't know who would ever know I was there. And it was Claude Knobs' secretary, and he said, "Mr. Knobs is very grateful that you guys doubled your gig last night, and he would like to repay that by offering you guys to open Stravinsky Hall, which is 6,000 people. We'd be opening for Isaac Hayes and B.B. King."
Oh, my goodness.
We got a 15-minute slot. And I said, "Boy, I don't know. I was going to iron my suit, but I suppose if they want us there, I guess we could work it in." So Kleeman and I do a 20-minute opening, and there was rumblings that there was going to be a jam session after BB's set. And so I start to push. I see Claude, and I said, "Hey, listen, I hear there's going to be a jam session." And he said, "Well, we'll see. We'll see." It was very tentative. We opened up the night. 6,000 people are screaming at 2 guys from America playing blues on this stage, and it was
just you two.
Unbelievable experience. I mean, it's so powerful. I mean, you just couldn't believe it. It was just a remarkable thing. Europeans really like our music more than we like our music. Believe me.
Some of our music.
Unbelievably well received. Yep. We get off the stage. Isaac does his thing. He gets done. I'm hanging out backstage with Isaac Hayes, just shooting the breeze. BB comes out with an entourage. They've got the backstage cordoned off, and Claude's no fool. He was selling backstage passes to people for $100 to throw just to see B.B. King because they just adore him.
Right.
B.B. comes out. There's a crowd of 50 to 100 people that are standing there, and he's like taken aback because there's not supposed to be anybody backstage. I'm leaning against the wall in a black suit, wearing a B.B. King baseball hat. No, I guess I'm wearing a Lee Oscar baseball hat. He sees me and he comes walking over and he goes, "Hey, Bob, how do you like Switzerland?" And so this whole crowd of people are like, "Wow, who's this guy? Why is B.B. King talking to him?"
Yeah.
And I said,
Bob, no less.
I said, "It's great." And he said, "I hope you're having a good time." I said, "I'm going to be having a lot more fun if I can get in on this blues jam that I heard about." And now Claude is there, and BB's manager Floyd is there, and this is not definite that this is happening. And Claude's looking at me with
like, I guess it's happening
he's got
now.
a bit of a pissed off look in his face that I brought this up. And I'm thinking, wow, I just blew it, you know. Uh-oh, these guys are mad. And BB looks at me, and he looks at his manager and Claude, and he says, "Well, that better happen." Just like that, we ended up in a jam session. We played after BB was done. We went out with Joe Sample, the piano player, the keyboard player from the Jazz Crusaders, was in the house. He came out, and we I have a wonderful DVD of a 65-minute jam session.
I would love to see that.
I'll go dig it out.
I'd love to talk to you more about this. I mean, I'm sure there's a number of things we didn't cover, but
did we mention my album?
You can get your plugs in now, Bob, because we got a minute left. You might
getting older every day.
You're getting hip surgery next week.
I'm getting my hips. My hips coming out next week, so I'll be dancing in about a month from now.
They put a new one in there for you.
Getting older every day is a great CD of my 60th birthday party. And I did take some time to write a book, How to Survive the Recession, a Vermont Perspective, and many thanks to my friend Jeff Danziger.
We'll edit all this out.
Oh, yeah, don't you dare take this out. And I'm actually giving some thought to a sequel to this book, How to Survive the Recovery.
Good. Well, I'll bring you on when you have that out.
Oh, good. I'll look forward to coming.
Well, thanks for coming on.
It's been an hour already.
I cannot believe it's been an hour, the longest hour of my life.
Oh my God, I bet it was.
And thank you for joining me on another show of Q&A Live, and we'll see you next time.